Good afternoon, and welcome to the premier 2017 After-Death Communications panel, and they've saved the best for last in my mind. So, no bias there. But anyhow, this panel is going to emphasize experiences of after-death communications. And these forms of communications and messages are as varied as everyone is a unique individual, and they are tailored for the moment. So a personal perspective paradigm for me is the principal design element of being here in the physical is ignorance. Often it's called the veil, but the truth of the matter is we wouldn't have these experiences without not knowing. There's no way to have an experience of discovery unless you first didn't know it. I mean, you hear near-death experiencers say they go over and then have access to all knowledge, But here, this is the experience we came for. And one part of that experience is the veil seeming to be loss or death. And we say there is no death. But if you're living in one of these contraptions, very much so. And what we find then through these gifts of death and communication is it helps us to understand that death is a transition. And so that's learning, and it's the gift of death. And that's what this panel is going to help you appreciate. So I'm going to start with some self-sharing. And then each panel member is going to do 15 minutes and then Q&A, and since there's nothing after us, well, we'll just drift into it. My father died in 1999, and he had a close relationship with my oldest daughter. And at her wedding, which was about 3 years later, it was an outdoor event. And it had this winding path that goes down to the gazebo where the minister was standing. And we're there waiting last to come down, the path. And as we start down the path, this butterfly came out in front of us and actually went down that winding path in front of us. I believe that was an after-death communication. My principal spiritual transformative experience was also a form of an after-death communication. This is even stronger for me in my life than an NDE, which I later had one. It happened August 15th, 1985, when my youngest brother committed suicide. There was a phone. I lived 4 hours away from the family homestead. Got the call. My dad got on the phone, and he didn't say, I got bad news. He just said, David killed himself. So I had no preparation. It was immediate grief, sobbing. I had a 6 and a 9-year-old daughter at the time. I probably would have tried to protect seeing their father lose, but in retrospect, it was the best. I was honest and totally in grief immediately. But I had to kind of stuff that, and I drove the 4 hours down to the homestead, spent the week there, That little church in this little rural crossroads in Pennsylvania poured out their hearts to our family, and that to me is what churches are for. That's what religion is the basis of. It's community. They had showed up before I got there and gone up and cleaned up the bedroom. They brought the meals during the week. And because of the nature of how he took his life, it was a closed casket service. He had used a high-powered rifle and put the muzzle under his chin. The week went on and everything happened, and I got back home about a week later, and I called and talked to my confidant at the time was my stepmother. And she says, you need to say goodbye to your brother. And I realized after that initial event, I had just put everything on hold. So I wasn't really a practicing meditator at the time, but I found some quiet time in an easy chair, and I reclined it in this little graphic for a moment, but bear with me. I closed my eyes and I said in my mind, I let the thought go, "Goodbye, David." Immediately, my consciousness was transported back to Pennsylvania, back to the funeral home where they'd taken the body, into the back of the funeral home where I'd never been physically, to a casket sitting on a gurney. I was thrust through the side of that casket into the space on that torso where there should have been a face, and it was just a mass, a gore. And I'm bilocating, I'm aware of my body back in that easy chair, just thrashing from the fear, the horror, the ghastly nature of this. At the pinnacle, as though there was someone standing 3 feet away, there was a male voice that came into my mind. 3 words: "He's not here." And with that, there was total peace and resolution. And that was my most spiritually transformative event. It's after that where I lost my fear of death. Of course, a little later, I've stopped to think, well, when I'm having a struggle, they can speak to me in plain English and give me answers. You know, why can't I get a little bit more of that on occasion? But that comes later. So thank you for your indulgence. First, we're going to have up Suzanne Mead, and she will describe her journey. You can see a little of her bio, and they don't have page numbers on these, but she was a psychotherapist who's had her own bout with terminal cancer and then transitioned into talking with the dead. So please welcome Suzanne Mead.
Test, test, test. Good. Good morning. Good morning. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'd also like to thank IANDS, because without this opportunity, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you this morning sharing my amazing journey and my amazing truth. There's one thing I want you to take away from my particular talk, and hopefully this whole conference, this whole weekend. Your loved ones who've crossed the veil are still around you, because we don't die. Death is an absolute illusion. How do I know that? Because 6 months before I was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I went to go get training on spirit communications with James Van Praagh, Mavis Patilla, and someone else. This is partly my chemo brain. Has anybody else been to Omega Institute? Oh, good. Oh, good. Yay, yay. Okay. So I go for a week of training, and I did not go with the intention of learning mediumship. That was not my goal. My goal was to go so I could communicate with all the people that I had lost. Between my husband and me, we've had multiple shock losses. My brother was killed in a plane crash. His body was dismembered. Later on, his son was shot in the heart. My husband's mother was murdered. She was shot in the head. 2 murder trials. A big trial with the airline that my brother was killed in. I wanted to go get trained because I knew other people had this ability. I wanted to know how to do it too. Well, you know, God always has a different plan. I really learned something. My first day of class, everyone else goes to the dining hall for dinner. I scheduled a massage. This is my very first experience with spirit contact that I'm going to share with you. It was so profound, I couldn't even believe it was happening. So here I am in class getting trained for this, and I didn't believe it. So I go for the massage. I'm in gym clothes, and I have this really cute college boy, and he's working on my feet. And I'm going to call him Philippe. So Philippe is working on me, and in my mind's eye, my eyes are closed, and in my mind's eye, an old woman appears. Now when spirit comes to me, spirit always consistently appears on my right side. But this is my first time, so I don't know this. Spirit appears in my mind's eye. It's an old woman. She does have her hair pulled back. She's petite, stout, a little full through the bosom. And she says to me in a French accent, "That he is my grandson. You tell him I'm here." Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. No, no. I don't know who you are, and I think it's in my head, and I think, I really need to get home and tell my therapist about this. Something's very wrong. She says to me again, see, this is my grandson. You tell him I'm here. I love him so much. And you see this paddle? Sometimes I had to spank him to make sure he was a good boy. I am not telling him you're here because I don't even believe you're here. I was so irreverent with spirit because I didn't believe it was happening. So you know what I told her? Look, lady, who's paying for this anyway? That would be me. And unless you can manifest money, I ain't talking. You know what she did? She crossed her arms and she said, I wait. This is an 80-minute massage. You can't be here the whole time. Oh, yes, she could. So finally, I got up on my elbows and I looked at the cute boy and said, honey, do you have a grandmother on the other side? And sometimes she had to spank you with a paddle to make sure you were a good boy. And by the way, she has a favorite phrase for you. In French, it's called my little favorite. He looked at me like, who are you? So the more anxious I get, the more fast I talk. And I said, I'm so sorry, I'm here with James Van Praagh and Mavis Patilla, and I'm just learning spirit communication, and this has never happened to me before. Okay. Yes, he confirmed everything. I lay back down, and then a second spirit showed up. I lay back down, all of a sudden a man comes in, a very handsome, debonair man, blonde, and he said to me, I love this boy. We were like brothers. You need to tell him I'm here. I look at the grandmother and I said, did you ring the dinner bell? Is the whole family going to show up? I'm like, oh my God, where'd my massage go? This man proceeded to give me, I'm an evidential medium. I want 4 pieces of evidence before I'm talking. Spirit knows this. If you don't give me 4 pieces of non-fluffy evidence, I'm not talking. So this man proceeded to show me he was very well dressed, very handsome and charismatic, and ooh, did the ladies love him. He was walking down Paris on a Saturday night when somebody intentionally came right up to him, walking very, very quickly, and went, bam! Pop! Right in his chest. He showed this to me over and over and over again to make sure that I really got it, because it was very important to him that I got the story correct. You know, when your loved ones die, and if they're coming through to a medium, they want to make sure that you have credibility as the medium so that their loved one will believe that they're really there. It's very important to them. So he showed me over and over again how he died. So this time when I sat up and I said, hey, cute college boy, you're not going to believe who's here now. I said, do you have someone that you loved who was shot? This time, there was no doubt in this boy. He looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm just me. I'm just here." No, nobody knows the truth of this situation. There's no way you could know that. That was my stepfather, and we did not tell anybody that he was shot. The family story was he died of a congenital heart defect. Wow. I believed. So that was the beginning of my journey. I'm going to fast forward. Wait, how much time do I have now? Okay. So I go home. I keep having these experiences. I go to my doctor for a checkup, and he goes, "What the hell happened to your immune system? You're raining tumors." I said, "What?" He said, "You've got tumors everywhere. We have to start treatment immediately." So immediately I had several surgeries. Within 2 weeks, I started 6 months of chemo, radiation, and a year of interferon. Spirit kept coming to me. Well, let me tell you, it was a mixed blessing, because I realized not everybody was ready to hear my exciting stories, right? I was so excited. I was like a kid who had a new superpower, and I wanted to demonstrate it for everybody. So this is part of the problem. If you're a new medium or you want to develop this skill, it's really helpful to get training, because you need to establish boundaries with spirit. So here I am telling my friends, and some of my friends didn't want to hear this stuff. I actually had a woman come up to me and she said, "You know what you're doing? It's of Satan." And I said, "Well, how could it be of Satan if the messages are all of love and that the recipient seems to have a healing effect?" She said, "Satan can be very tricky." So for a while, I didn't tell my story. I kept quiet. I shut down, and I became more isolated, and I couldn't talk about it. And it felt very lonely. Well, as circumstances would have it, I ended up going to something, a conference, and synchronistically, I ended up seated next to dinner with Brian Weiss. You guys know Brian Weiss, right? Okay. So he has been a light mentor for me. I sat next to him. I was so excited, I couldn't even eat, and I talked so quickly that if you know him, his energy is so lovely and calm, and he talks like this. And I'm going, and then Brian, and then and blah 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 blah. But I can't tell my story. I can't tell people. After I gushed all of these spirit contact stories, he finally looked at me, and he calmly said, "Suzanne, if you do not tell your stories, that has the potential to kill you more than your cancer. Think of all the people you could help heal. As a psychotherapist, and then you have this gift?" I thought, wow. So, after Brian said that, I got busy and I started to write a book, and I entered a contest for Hay House. I won. I thought, this is amazing. Spirit must really want me to get the word out and tell this story. So my book is coming out by the end of this year. Spirit Untethered is the story. But what I want you to know, your loved ones are always around you. They're aware of your struggles, your trials, your tribulations. Everything. And as soon as you ask if they can be with you at that moment, they are. Always ask for signs, because they love to give them. We don't die. And what connects us? You've heard this word all weekend long. It's love. It's love. That's what Spirit has shown me. When I ask how they find their loved ones, every single person in this room, the person that you have lost, you have like an energetic thread. It's almost like your unique fingerprint. It is a spiritual plasma. Love is the spiritual plasma, and it's unique to you and your loved one. And although that plasma can stretch, it can never be broken. Don't doubt. They're around you, and I know this because I see them. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will have Melinda Cress. Now, Melinda's going to stay seated because standing for her is a little more difficult. She's titles herself an interpreter for the unresponsive dying, and that many times she's connected with people who are transitioning, and she does a shared death experience. It helps bring through communication, resolution for them and the ones on this side. So please welcome Melinda Cress.
Thank you, Chad. Is this not on? Yep. There we go. Thank you all for being here. I know it's kind of tempting to leave a little early with this being towards the end of the conference, but like he said, the best is at the end. So anyway, thank you for being here. Mine is a little different. Most people have not heard of being an interpreter for the unresponsive dying. I'm also like a tour guide that helps the unresponsive navigate the unfamiliar territory. I first became familiar with this 20 years ago during my own near-death experience through a 5-year illness. So I know what it feels like to be in bed and go from a full-time job, part-time job, housebound, bedbound, and being taken care of by others. That was a 5-year process, and then it was another 5-year process coming up from that after the near-death experience. I won't go into details about that, that'll be another time, but what I would like to share then is how I came to be doing what I'm doing and what type of information is given to us through this type of work. The next thing after the near-death experience was 3 years later, and I had what was not told to us yet by Dr. Raymond Moody called a shared death experience. That would be another 9 years later till we heard that terminology. But I was at the bedside of a dear friend during the last couple of days of her life. She had gone through cancer, chemo, radiation. She was young. She was in her early 30s. She had only been married about 5 years and had 2 young children, so she had brought this family together. They hadn't had long together till she was diagnosed. So I was with her just as she was able to say hello to me, she recognized me, and then she became unresponsive. So the next several days, many of us were at her bedside. We had to take turns. We were allowed 2 to 3 at a time because she had such a broad company of friends and relatives that wanted to be with her during this time. Now this was what we would call a difficult death. She wanted to squeeze every moment out of this life for her 2 children and for her husband. So it was difficult to watch. She was the body, and we know those of us that have been in hospice and have been with people as they're taking their last breath, and when the body's struggling to still be alive. It was very difficult to watch, especially for someone that you love very much. So the first time when it was my turn to sit by the bedside, I saw everything just like everyone else did. And then I realized the energy started changing in the room. And if any of you attended William Peters' talk, he lets you know some of what happens during the shared death experience. And I can tell you that's how it happens for me. The energy started changing, the room looked different, it felt different. And then I realized I was seeing 2 realities at the same time in that same place, one superimposed on the other. I could see the body struggling and gurgling for air. And then I saw the dear friend that I knew laying there comfortably, at peace, and at ease with what was going on. This was difficult for me to understand what I was seeing. First of all, this is the first time I had seen anything like this since my near-death experience, and I was still trying to process that. And now I'm here at a dear friend watching her in a split reality. And at the same time, I'm having a split reality because the friend that loved her dearly is mourning and feeling for her for what she's going through. But then the near-death experiencer knows, and I could already see the transition team, is what I call them, that was there with her, and they had brought with them 2 loved ones. One that presented himself as a father energy. I do not think this was her biological father. She was from another country. I don't know her family history. The next day that I was there with her, the father figure was still there with the transition team, coming down a little closer to the bed. When I first started this 10 years ago, they always sat up in the right-hand side corner of the room, whatever the room was. And then they would open, and the loved ones would walk through the center and come and be down with the patient that was dying. After the first one, the father figure came, then the brother figure came. Again, he did not present himself as a brother, but someone that she loved as a brother, so it's brother energy. He came and sat down by the bed. The next day, the transition team all came down from the ceiling. These are light beings. I see them as silhouettes. I can see through them. They're golden color. They came and all stood around the bed. And I don't remember what speaker it said, but they never go to the end of the bed because that's where the angels and people, okay. So they do go to the end of the bed, but there were so many with this one that they went all the way around a half circle around the bed. And this was all the light loved ones. So then I watched as I would shift because I was trying to understand, how can this be? How can I see this and yet I can see the other just like everyone else? And all I had to do was shift my focus. All I did was think, just like in a near-death experience, you would think and the answer was there before you finished. So I'm like, how can I do this? But I looked at the body and I saw the body. Then I looked at the non-physical and I saw all of these beings and her at peace and comfort. And then I realized her focus, she could go to whichever focus she wanted to go to. She could be in touch with that body that was struggling, but most of the time she didn't, and most do not. Why? Why would you want to do that when you can be there with these light beings where there's so much love and you feel it's so much peace? So this was my first shared death experience. We went through, I think it was about 4 days, 3.5, 4 days of me going in. I'm not telling a soul, because first of all, these people don't even know I've had a near-death experience. I haven't been able to speak about that. And I'm certainly not going to stand here and say, hey, I can see 2 realities going on right here. So that was quiet, that was inside, and I'm still trying to process all of this information. And so I can tell you at this point, I have the grief of losing my friend, but I have the celebration of seeing where she's at and where she's going. I was there when she took her last breath. I saw her essence, that's what I refer to it as. I saw her essence lift from her body. Alongside of her was the father figure and the brother figure. They moved up, and now the transition team is back up in the corner of the room. They moved up, and the transition team opened up in the middle. They walked through, and then they were gone. Now I can tell you, and this is so selfish to me, that I feel selfish, that the near-death experience, and if you've heard throughout the weekend, is we try to have that feeling again. We want to go back to that eternal, everlasting love that loves us beyond our understanding. And when I'm at the bedside of an unresponsive dying, I can open the door, this door is opening to bring them in. And I can feel that breeze. I can feel that love. It's not quite as intense as it was for the near-death experience, but it's still the same quality. It still opens my heart. So I give nothing compared to what I receive every time I'm with someone when they're dying. That was my first one. So now we'll fast forward to my second. That's 3 years later, and that was with my father. Now, I consider him my teacher because this first shared death experience, there was really no communication between us. I was an observer. I felt and I could see, but no one talked to me. When it was my father, we were in intensive care, and it was several days in intensive care, and I was the only one with him. They had already said that, it's just going to be a matter of time, in a couple of hours. Family had gone home, and so I was in the room alone with him. And I realized that my dad was a farmer, and he had been stuck in a body for 2 years. For the worst thing a farmer can happen is to be stuck inside. And he was stuck in a body that he didn't know who he was, who we were. It was 24/7 care all the time to do everything. And 2 years of that, then he began going into his dying process. And he taught me how to be an interpreter and how to help be there for the unresponsive dying. First of all, he started talking to me, and I'm like, you can hear me? I can hear you? Oh, wow. I've really gone over the edge this time. But he talked to me just as easily as he talked to me in body, as easily as I hear you and I speak. I could feel what he was feeling. He showed me things. I introduced him to the cord that was holding his spirit into the body, and I explained when that is severed, then you don't come back. As long as you have the cord, you come back. And I said, go up and look outside. He went up through the floor, went up to the ceiling, looked out, and I could feel him, and I went with him. I won't go into what all he did. So as we experienced this, and as he was taking his last breath, he was telling me that this is what you can do. You can help people feel at ease, because I helped him not be afraid in those last few moments. I helped him navigate so that he knew that he could go through here. He could fly. He flew over Kansas and Colorado. He loved the crops. This is the farmer. He picked up the soil and smelled it. He gave it to me, and as a children, he would give us the soil, and he goes, that needs a little more sweetness to it. Now, sweetness means cow manure, okay? That's not my idea, but that's his idea of sweetness. So he taught us how to smell it and enjoy it so that we knew how to produce the crops and how to live off the land. And so then he taught me, though, if you start trying to tell me, because being the good little daughter that I was, I'm like, but Dad, if you do this, it'll be easier for you. He immediately shut the curtain, would not let me see, hear, or feel anything. And I'm like, what happened? I don't know what's going on. And then I heard it was placed in my knowing, and anybody that knows me knows that's a term I use a lot. It just is there. He said, don't tell me about my dying experience. This is mine, not yours. You're here to help me, not take me. So is when I said, okay, I get it. So I said, I won't do that. He opened the curtain, and we continued on with our conversation. Then I got excited again, like I always do, start talking faster and going, this is great, and Dad, let's do this, and oh, wow. And he shared so many things. It was a very healing process between a father and a daughter. And again, I tried to guide him. He slammed the curtain just like Broadway show. I used to live in New York City, so I love the Broadway shows. He just shut the curtain. And I said, oh, I did it again. I'm sorry, I get it. I promise I won't do it again. He opened it up, and we continued. So that is where I learned how to do this. And just because of I'm realizing that the shared death experience, it's helping them navigate, because some deaths, every death is different, every single death, and I never know what I'm going to find myself in. I find them in a virtual reality space. And in that space, they created. I don't. I move around through their experience. I do not guide them. I'm like a tour guide in another country. I give them the language so that they can ask for what they want. I can give them kind of the protocol of what is allowed here, what is not, and how it works. And then I'm with them in however way they need it. And then they go on their way. So with this shared death experience, I've learned so much about dying, so much about living, and how to be with someone as a mindful presence, not the way I think they should be or what they should do or not do, but how they need me to be. It's all about them, and I'm simply there to be there in the way that I can be there for them. To help it be easier, there's a lot of fear for people right now around death. That's changing because of all the people like you guys. That's changing. But right now, just to help ease their fear and help them learn how to go through this transition as they're walking up to death's doorway and walk through it. Please look at my website. I have this at the back if you'd like this. It tells you a little bit more about me. The stories that they tell me is unbelievable. The healing that families have in those moments, or when they know what their family member's going through, even though the body part may look difficult, they're usually not clued into that part. And there are many people like me that can do these things. So do know that this is possible for all of you to do in whatever way you can do. You can be there in whatever way is your way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melinda. That was super. And next we have Ann Salisbury. She's in regular contact with those on the other side. She's done thousands of sessions for those who have had spiritually transformative experiences and those who have had loved ones pass. She's a best-selling author or co-author of 3 books on intuition and the afterlife. Please welcome Ann Salisbury.
Thank you, Chuck. Hi, I'm Ann Salisbury, and you can find more about us and our materials at gointuition.com. I have been basically clairvoyant since birth. You could call it telepathic, you could call it mediumship. Basically, what I enjoy doing is talking to people on the other side, talking to pets, talking to people about how we can improve our relationships in this world. And as you know, everything is relationship. There's nothing that's not. And when I was little, I would run upstairs to go to bed at night, and I'd end up at the landing before I made the corner to my bedroom, and there'd be this woman standing there every single night, standing in her green dress, staring out the back window towards the park. And I assumed she was part of our household. You know, she had to be, right? She was there. Years later, I asked my mother, so anyway, who was that lady who stood on the landing? And she's like, what lady? I don't know what you're talking about. And so at that point, and with many other instances thereafter, I realized I was seeing some things that other people were not recognizing, at least, that they were seeing. And so I learned to be quiet. But now I have the wonderful experience of being able to practice as a psychotherapist and coach and intuitive or clairvoyant with people all over the world around contacting those loved ones on the other side. So to give you some examples, I had, Greg and I, my partner, he and I were asked to go into the Hotel de Paris up in Georgetown, Colorado, because they had had ghosts, they'd had a lot of situations, they needed to fix their water main and all that. And ghost hunters had asked to go in there to do a big show, and they were like, no, we don't want that to be that, big a deal, but we do want help. So they called us in, and we took pictures of the ghosts and everything else and cleared the energy so that it was a better space for them. And then a couple of years later, I was at a lunch meeting with some of these ladies, and I walked into the house and back into the kitchen, and suddenly the lights go off. And they say, oh, the ghost that hasn't shown up here in 2 years must now know that Anne is here. And I'm like, great. So the hostess goes, she turns the light back on, and then the ghost proceeds to turn the lights back off. And so then they're like, okay, we don't want to get down to our meeting just yet. Let's find out what's going on with this ghost. So I asked her, what is your purpose for interfering with these people here today? Why are you doing this? And she's like, this is my house. They have redesigned my kitchen, and I want this whole place put back to the way it was when I lived here. And I said, well, excuse me, I don't think you realize that you're dead. And she's like, doesn't matter, this is my house, and have him put it back the way it was. So as we're talking over lunch, I said, do you want to go to the light? Would you like to have some help? She's like, don't talk to me about that. Leave me alone. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm going to have lunch. Leave me alone. And so that night, go to bed, and at about 1 in the morning, our door to our bedroom flies open. Now, the air conditioning sucks it closed. It doesn't blow it open. And so Greg, doing his manly thing, jumps out of bed, grabs the flashlight, and goes looking for intruders, right? And I said, oh, sorry, honey, I forgot to tell you. When I was at lunch today, I met a ghost. She was not very friendly with me, and I guess she followed me home. Sorry. And so we ended up talking to her and saying, you know, if you're interested in going to the light, we can help you with that, but otherwise, don't bug us. And she said, well, I've thought about it, and I've thought about what you told me, and yes, I'm interested. So we helped her cross, and we were able to go back to sleep. So basically, you could say she contacted me, right? And then I was able to help her with Greg, he does energy work, to go to the other side. So that was a communication that she initiated, and then we responded to. The next one I can share with you is a client came and her son had mistakenly had an overdose and died. And she was grieving a lot because he had come to her in her dreams for 2 years after he died. She felt very comforted by that, and now suddenly he wasn't coming. And she was grief-stricken. She was afraid that the connection was falling apart. So we talked to her son, and her son said, I love my mother very much, but I need to get on with my life, and she needs to get on with hers. And I don't know how else to do this but to cut down on the communication. So she heard that. She didn't like it, but she was okay with it. And so then that night, we go to bed, and we live up in the mountains where you don't need air conditioning, but we use fans. So we always turn a fan on at night. And about 1 in the morning, we are awakened with the fan suddenly going off. And we're like, holy cow, who is it now? And it was this fellow, and he wanted to make sure that his mom didn't go back into grief because she had been spending 2 years grieving him, and he wanted to make sure that she really got it and didn't switch back into an old pattern. So we're like, okay, got it. We'll let her know. And great. Next morning, get up, see clients on the phone all morning, go out, sit on our deck to have lunch like we normally do. And suddenly I hear this big bang in the kitchen. So I race in, and as I'm crossing by the refrigerator, these ice cubes start pouring out of the refrigerator at me. Bang, bang, bang onto the floor. And I'm like, holy cow, okay, we got it. We hear you. What do you want to say now? And he says, well, I just want to thank you so much for contacting my mother, for at least talking to my mother, helping her resolve her grief. And I think you should also talk to my grandmother. So we're like, okay, because that is actually where he died. He had died at his grandmother's house. So we do pick up the phone, we call them, and they come in for another session, and they're so grateful that there's a family healing. We explained how she can connect with him regularly now. We trained her on how she can do that, and yet she would not be doing that every single night in her dreams because he needed to move on and she needed to move on. And it was a huge blessing because right after that session, so she'd been unemployed for 2 years. She'd been so grief-stricken she couldn't work. 2 weeks after that, she gets a job that she tried to get all those years, and she gets moving on with her life. He's thrilled. He's moving on with his life, and life is good. Then, just about 2.5 years ago, my mother was living with us. She had been for 3 years because she had dementia and was having problems, and we had hospice care. And she was not going to die. She said, I plan to live till I'm 120 years old. I told you that. You should remember that. I'm only 90 now. I'm not dying. And we said, well, Fissy, that's her name from Phyllis, you know, let's look at your condition. Your little body here is about shot. So how are you going to do this? What kind of situation are you going to have here? And she's like, well, it'll be okay. I know it'll be okay. And we said, I don't know. And she's like, I love editing your books. I finally found a purpose in life. Hadn't worked my whole life, but I love doing editing. So I plan on sticking around because I know you're going to write more books, and I have a job. And we said, okay, what about this? What if you work with us from the other side? What if you become our investigative reporter? We want you to go over there and sleuth out what it's really like. We hear a lot of stories because I've had tons of clients who've told me what it's like on the other side through past life regression and through talking to loved ones. But I said, okay, let's really check this out. And she's like, okay, I got a job. I can be an investigative reporter. And we're like, great. Okay. So then she is sitting in her chair, getting ready, and all the family members start showing up in the room. The transition team is the same words that I got. They were definitely there in the room. And she is talking to people, and then she starts talking to this stuffed dog, and that she loves stuffed animals. And the stuffed dog is telling her how the universe really works. And she says, people have been lying to us. That is not how the universe works. It's a lot simpler than that. And so we took notes, we listened to her, and we learned a lot. Then she transitions to the other side, and we had made this agreement to keep in touch, right? But we didn't say how. We just said, it'll happen. We didn't think that we didn't even think of, how, right? And so I'm asleep in bed a couple of nights after she's died, and suddenly in my face is my mother, and she says, are you in there? And I'm like, holy cow, yes, I'm in here. So what's new with you? And she's like, well, we said we'd talk. Are we going to talk? And I said, yes, we're going to talk. Good. And so from then on, we did talk. And I said, well, Fissy, don't you think it'd be good if you recuperated a little bit? Because we've been tracking you. I've been clairvoyantly watching your progress. Every day we check in and we see, but we didn't want to interfere. And I said, and I know you've got some recuperation to do. I've seen the hospital team over there. So do you want to just keep at that, and then we'll talk a little later? She's like, okay, we got a plan. I'm like, yeah. So we're going about our stuff. And then, maybe a month or two later, I get this vision. Ding dong, my mother's at the front door in her underwear. And I said, Fissy, what are you doing here? And she's like, it's time. I told you I would tell you when it's time. It's time. And so I said, okay, that's great. What are you doing in your underwear? She's like, hadn't thought of that. Didn't know. And So I'm like, and how did you get here? She goes, well, I'm not exactly sure. Like, okay, no taxi, nothing? Okay, we're fine. And so after that, we just kept talking with her, and it was really interesting because, see, we'd made the agreement to contact her. She'd agreed to contact us. And then as we were watching her on the other side, there was a lot of healing that was going on, because we'd say things like, Fissy, have you thought about checking in with your higher self about that before you go off into what you were calling the borderlands to make some more investigations? And she's like, I didn't think of that. And I'm like, well, maybe you should, because we know you wanted to be this investigative reporter, and that's fabulous, but you should also be careful with what you do with yourself. And it seems like you could be getting into some trouble here. So she's like, okay, higher self. Yes, that's right. So by us talking to her about what she could do on the other side, she was able to increase her healing. And since then, this last couple of years, we've watched her kind of integrate the wisdom from her higher self into her being. We've watched her sign up for classes. And and that's in our book, Journey to Heaven. There's a lot of that, and we're working on the next book that comes after that, because it is so interesting what goes on the other side. This after-death communication, it's 100% real, and it just takes the decision to connect, so you can connect with them, they can connect with you, and it's meant to be. And in closing, I'm just going to share with you one short thing that happened at the IANDS of Boulder talk that we gave sometime earlier this year. We were sharing some experiences and asked people if they had anybody on the other side they wanted us to talk to. And a gentleman said, yes, my wife, she died. Can you tell me how she's doing? And his wife came forward, she shared, and he was crying, and it was a beautiful thing. And he said, and you know what she used to do? She used to drop dimes for me, dimes, and that let me know she was there. So after the talk, we walked outside, and out of the ethers came a dime that bounced on my shoe and onto the cement pavement. And I'm like, okay, what is this? And she's like, thank you, thank you. So I just want you to know that my experience is they talk to us, we talk to them. The more we can keep that communication open, the better all our lives will be, because everything is one, as you've been hearing about at this conference. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to question and answer. If you come to the mic, please. If you want to ask any individual, address your question to them, or you can address it to the panel.
Thank you. You all live in another world from mine. So if there are transition teams that helps the person transition to the other world, why do some people not go and become spirits here that then you see? And
well, what I found is some people don't listen. It's no different on the other side than it is here, really, because that woman at lunch, she didn't want to go. She was attached to her house. Mm-hmm. When you have attachments, when you fracture your personality and you leave it in places, it's hard to cross fully. Mm-hmm. Of course, they do somewhat. But that's where the shamanic tradition of gathering your spirit back is really important.
When you say gathering your spirit back,
let's say you go to the Grand Canyon and you love it. Mm-hmm. You leave a part of yourself there.
I see.
Let's say you have a granddaughter and you want to watch over her all the time. You leave a part of you there.
So basically attachments.
Attachments hold you to this reality. The key to having a good transition is to make completions with people, places, things. Just the more you can clean out before, the better the transition will be. And then you'll be able to pay attention. Oh yeah, there's a transition team in the room now. They can help me. If you don't want to go, if you're still stuck on things, you don't see stuff, right? So you have to clean out in order to see it.
Do you, kind of along the same lines, people who have dementia, do you feel there's a psycho-spiritual element to that, not just physical, in which they are leaving very slowly for some reason?
There's a psycho-spiritual aspect to absolutely everything. The physical is the last thing that gets it. Everything starts in spirit. Everything, right? So the dementia allows for somebody to, well, everybody's different, so I don't want to generalize. I've seen so many different things, but yes, psycho-spiritual.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add something too. I found as when I'm working with the last stages of Alzheimer's that they have come across, and I've done enough now that I've kind of come up with a pattern of what is general and what is personal. And I do feel that each way that a person goes over their way of dying, that there is purpose in that. And sometimes the more gradual is there because there's a reason for that gradual, and then some are by accidents it's very quick. So I see that there's great purpose in it. Sometimes they show me what it is and sometimes they don't, but I do trust and know. I know that there is reason for whatever illness, whatever accident, however it goes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add to your question, in my understanding of something like dementia, as horrible as it is, it can also be a karmic lesson for family members to have to learn love and patience and tolerance and perhaps caring for that person. Maybe that person has been the caretaker of everyone else, and now it's burning off karma in turn to take care of the person who's ill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. This question is for Susan and Ann. I don't want to leave you out there, Melinda, but they're the ones talking. Anyhow, is regards to if a client asks you to contact a certain person that's on the other side, is there ever a time that the spirit refuses to come and speak or communicate?
In order for somebody to come forward, they have to be interested in responding, right? It's just like some people don't pick up the phone here, right?
Okay.
So sometimes you can request to have a conversation and the person's just not that interested, but in my experience, if I am willing to sit with that for a minute, then the individual will come forward. So, sometimes a client will have really upset experiences, and the reason they want to contact their parent, let's say, is to rail on them.
Oh.
And so would you come forward to get beaten up?
Probably not.
Probably not. So if you can talk your client through that and say, you know what, we all have learning experiences, and if your parent was that mean to you in this lifetime, the likelihood is that you were as nasty to them last time. So let's take some personal responsibility, and let's all learn and grow from it, because this is all just about an experience. It's not about blame, because that will take you on a dead end. If you can get yourself more into your heart, then the other individual is much more willing to come forward. And I've always had them come forward because I see it as a healing for everybody, and so it works.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you have anything to add there, Susan?
I'm trying to think if I've ever had an experience where someone has not come forward. Sometimes it's taken a little bit of an invitation or patience on my end. But if someone is asked in this, and I have the sitter there, I haven't had somebody not come forward yet. I'm sure I'll have that experience. I haven't experienced it yet.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're at the end. If there's not another question, we're going to say thank you very much to our panel. It's been an incredible and special moment. Thank you.